Welcome back to another episode of the Leaders in the Making podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by a couple of my close friends. We're going to be looking at emotional health and specifically diving into what does the phrase emotional health even mean? How do we process our emotions in a reasonable and accessible way? And then we'll receive some insight into a practical look into what emotional health looks like over the course of the summer. So really excited for this topic. I think this conversation is going to be a lot of fun, really, really cool stuff. So without further ado, I want to welcome two of my good friends. We have Jeremy Marshall and Samarys Morales-Meléndez. Welcome to the podcast. So excited to have y'all here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about who you are, your background with WinShape, all those types of things?
Sure. You good?
Yep.
We're very happy today.
It's a fun day. You got your fun socks on?
Fun socks, yeah. My name's Jeremy Marshall. I've worked with WinShape for 18 years. I've done some stuff with Retreat, worked for our college program for over a decade, and currently serve on our learning and development team and live on my wife's family farm with my wife Stacy and our 3 daughters.
That's awesome. What is you said learning and development? What does that look like within the WinShape world?
Yeah, we do staff training across the foundation. For example, we do a public speaking workshop a couple times a year to help people do public speaking well.
That's awesome.
And then development is more holistic, whole life. So I lead our staff devotions on a weekly basis up on the mountain campus at WinShape. And a little bit of everything in between.
Nice. A lot of fun. Well, Jeremy, thank you for joining us. This will be a lot of fun today. Samarys, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a bit about your WinShape journey, what you're doing now, and all the fun things.
Yeah, so I have been serving with WinShape since the summer of 2023. I have served the last 2 summers with WinShape Camps for Communities, which is a traveling day camp across the United States. And this upcoming summer, I will be the director for the Costa Rica team. I'm currently the director associate for Costa Rica on the international camps team.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Costa Rica, have you ever been before?
Yes, so I got to go this past spring in 2024 down to Costa Rica with a really sweet team, and I'm excited to return and spend a summer there.
That's so fun. And as a director associate, you're working in the office. So
yes.
What does that kind of world look like for you right now?
Yeah, so I get to be part of our year-round team working alongside Margaret Sharp and Cameron Burgeon, and we just have a really good time. We are preparing and just prepping all the things from staffing to manuals, all the good stuff to get ready for the summer.
Nice. That's so fun. I'm super jealous of you going to spend your whole summer in Costa Rica. That
it'd be sweet.
Sounds pretty nice.
Yeah.
But that'll be a lot of fun.
Yes.
Well, thank you all both for being here. Let's go ahead and jump into it. And I think just to start off, we're talking about emotional health. Help me define emotional health. I know that we've had, up to this point, we've talked about, on this podcast, we've talked about spiritual health and we've talked about relational health. What is emotional health and how does that kind of tie in to the other healths?
Way to jump in with that technical term, the health is.
Yeah, we'll trademark that.
Well, you guys might have already touched on this, but every aspect of our health really overlaps. We're created as integrated beings, and so if we think about it, it's helpful to talk about the different aspects of our health. But if we think of them as segmented, that's not particularly helpful. So our emotional health is really about how we are aware of, how we hold, and how we express our emotions. But how well we're able to do that is going to be influenced by how we're doing in our spiritual health, in our relational health, in our physical health, all different aspects. What do you have?
Yeah, I would just say that, like you said, it is a holistic health. So emotional is just one piece of that, and how important it is to be holistically healthy. Like you can't be emotionally healthy without all the other kinds of health that you've already mentioned. But yeah, I agree.
All the health is.
All the health is.
What are some ways that you've seen that emotional health is often misinterpreted? Whether it's you're hearing from other people or observing even in yourself. What are some ways that we oftentimes might misinterpret what emotional health looks like?
I think it's really easy, at least for me, and I'm sure people can relate. It's really easy to get confused between mental health and emotional health. I think sometimes it's a little confusing to try and see the differences between the two or try to separate them when, we've said, health the healthses all come together to be like a holistic kind of health. So I think that is a really easy way that they're misinterpreted, just that difference between mental and emotional.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think sometimes in a professional setting, emotional health is framed as how in control or even maybe not even expressing of emotion we are. Like in a professional setting, we got to keep all of our emotions to the side, and the better you are at doing that, then the more emotionally healthy you are. And I would push back on that some, because if we're totally disconnected from our emotions, then it's going to be really easy to not directly express them. So I think there's a continuum and attention in any setting with emotional health where it's not about not expressing it or expressing it at a time. It's about being mindful of how we express them.
Yeah. I mean, I have said this a couple times on the podcast, but I oftentimes find myself trying to put myself in these questions as I'm asking them and imagining how I might misinterpret things or how this might come across to me personally. And I find myself doing that with emotional health a good bit. I think what you're saying, Jeremy, of like trying to, I guess compartmentalize might be a good word there. Maybe not the best, but it's like I kind of try to separate different areas of my life. And I feel like I try to appropriate certain times for emotional health. And internally, I'm like, hey, it's not appropriate in this setting or this space. So I can definitely resonate with that statement you're making. Yeah, I just think on top of that too, I think one misinterpretation that we talked about this weeks ago, the three of us, but the idea of how some people are more emotional than others or less emotional. Do y'all want to expound on that? Do y'all remember we had that conversation of, I think I was the one who made a statement of, I'm not an emotional person. And we're like, well, that might not be true.
I love that you're bringing back up like an outright disagreement we had. Because I think it ended amicably.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I mean, I think that it was, again, me making a statement and then later being like, oh yeah, that's not a true statement and that's not probably a fair statement to put out there. But yeah, you want to speak a little bit more into that, like what it means or how you would disagree with that statement of like, hey, I'm not super emotional.
Yeah, so I have a side gig doing private practice counseling, and Titus, you're in good company. A lot of, especially the guys that come into the counseling room, make the statement, well, I'm not an emotional person, or if it's a couple, I'm not emotional and she is. And I think that a biblical worldview is going to illuminate that we were all created as spiritual beings. We're also all created as emotional beings. And so I think that we all were created to be people of emotion, but we all exist on a spectrum of how connected we are to our emotions and how free we feel to express our emotions. And that ties into how we grew up, the environment we grew up in, the culture we grew up in, and what the norms are in our culture. And so there's a lot of things that play into that, but I think it's important that we would all embrace the idea that we are all emotional beings, and it's worth, whether I see myself as super emotional, maybe too much, or not emotional, that we explore what that's about and what's a healthy way of expressing that reflects our image.
Yeah. How do you think we can do that? How can we judge that, like our levels of emotional health or wherever we're at in our own journey with our emotional health? Like what are some systems or questions or things that we can look at for judging that?
I think being aware very much about like how you're feeling, and then also like how you're expressing it, and just like how are we reacting to our emotions? Are we suppressing them? Or are we letting them rule what we're doing? Like just asking, I think it is important to just be asking yourself those questions, especially when you're facing like some really heavy emotions maybe, or maybe just like big emotions. I think some little things happen and like, yes, you have an emotion, but then there's other things that are bigger and they are expressed in different ways. And so just kind of having that time of reflection and thinking about like, are my emotions ruling how I'm acting, or are my emotions, am I pretending like they're not even existing? Like, which I think is really easy, I think, in our society today, to just pretend like the way you're feeling isn't even happening. Just kind of like what Jeremy said, like is the culture around you like open to you being an emotional being? And I think that's just a bigger conversation. So I'm glad we're talking about it today because I think it's really important. To just talk about that.
That's great. And you said something that really caught my ear because I think personally, again, when I'm asking these questions on the podcast, I have to put myself in that place of like, I need to ask this where I'm at or where the questions that I have personally. Hopefully that's resonating with our listeners. But you were saying checking our emotions with our actions. And I guess my question is like, when is it appropriate to let your emotions impact your actions and when is it not? I guess an example, like I feel like if I'm like very excited or joyful, it's easier to allow that to come out in my actions. But if I'm feeling like angry, I'm like, well, I don't want to go. Like I probably shouldn't go flip a table right now. And so that's, I don't know. I guess that's my question of like, when is it appropriate to find that, or is it like appropriate at all times? I don't know. Does that make sense of the question I'm asking? Or
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out whether the response has anything to do with what you're saying. 'Cause I think it would be disingenuous for us to think that we could ever act in a way that is not at all influenced by how we're feeling. But just as a husband and father of 3 daughters and a minister and an employee and a counselor, I think what I've found is that the stronger emotions I'm feeling, the more I need to ride the brakes on any actions I take. Because the stronger, just speaking from experience personally, for me, the stronger I feel about something, the more quickly I am going to tend to act, and the more extreme my action is going to tend to be, and the more blind I'm probably going to be to how other people experienced my actions. Because it's big emotions are kind of loud. So if you're in a coffee shop and the beans are grinding and the house music is really loud and you're in a conversation, you're talking pretty loud, and all of a sudden the music cuts off and the grinder cuts off, you're shouting in a quiet room and it feels super awkward. And that's how it can be when we're just living our life with really strong emotions and we're not aware that we're shouting. So to wrap that up, I think we always act in ways that are influenced by our emotions. But I think the bigger emotions we're feeling, the more slow we need to decide what actions we're going to take. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's speaking to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so. It makes sense to me. So hopefully it's making sense to more people than just me. This is really good. Thank you all so much. Okay, so we're getting this understanding of what emotional health is, what it looks like for us to kind of misinterpret it and judge it in the right way. As we're thinking about like our leaders, we're thinking of our staff specifically for camp, but just our leadership staff in general, or leaders in general. Why is it important for like as a leader to take care of your emotional health? Like I guess in response to like the people around you, the people you're leading, what is the impact there of like emotional health on leadership?
I think a big thing that I think I have come to learn, because I think we were talking about a minute ago, Jeremy, you were talking about like all that was so good, but it's something I think like our staff and people my age are kind of still learning as young adults. And to play to what you were saying too, Titus, I think it is a learning, something that we're always learning, like how to be better stewards of our emotional health. And that kind of goes to what I wanted to talk about, is that I think we need to look at our emotional health as something that we're stewarding, how it is. Everything should be an act of worship, and so our emotional health can also be that, and how we can steward it when we're stewarding it well, like we are lifting it up to the Lord, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. I think it's easy to let it be on the back burner, kind of like how I said before, but how beautiful it could be to just give it to the Lord and to steward it well, just like we do our resources and just like we do with all the other things in our life. Like our emotional health should also be something that we're giving to the Lord as an act of worship.
Yeah, that's great. I think oftentimes I am reminded that we are in the process of becoming more like Christ, and we're in the process of looking more and more like Him. And in doing that in and of itself is an act of worship, us becoming more Christ-like. And I think the reflection of Christ in our emotional health should be in a very healthy place where we can process and understand our emotions in a good, healthy way. Jeremy, anything to add there on the leader front?
Well, yeah, I love what you said about that being an act of worship and becoming more like Christ, because while I'll out myself, I've not served camp before, but I've been adjacent. Had daughters go to camp. Yeah. I've lived in the midst of camp, and the amount of responsibilities you carry 24 hours a day can be overwhelming, and the amount of pressure you can feel to influence and impact the campers you're leading. But the reality is your presence as an older person is going to be the most significant thing you offer to the campers. And if campers are going to walk away really deeply impacted over a long term, it's probably not going to be something you say, something you teach. It's much more likely to be who you are and how they experienced you. And so one of my favorite quotes is from St. Francis of Assisi. He said, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And so I think for all the camp staffers, if you're stewarding your emotions well, that's going to show up in how you are present with the campers, and that can really have a significant impact.
Yeah. You hit on this a little bit. Like, there's a lot that happens in camp. There's a lot of heaviness from just the busyness of the day, or burdens or weight that you might carry from back home. Sometimes I can forget that life goes on outside of camp, that it's not just in this little bubble, but there's a lot of opportunity for things to pile up. What are some of those like potential challenges? Samarys, I know you served in the summer, and so you might know some of this like spot on. And but then also, what are ways to combat those challenges, or what are ways to handle those challenges in the summer?
Well, I can speak to some of those challenges, and I think just some ways that I have kind of taken ownership of that. But I think when I was thinking about this, there's about maybe 3 major things. The first just being things outside of camp and how those things can affect our emotional health. I know for me this past summer, I had a lot of things going on at home. And as much as we want to think like camp is this place of just like butterflies and unicorns, like it's just a different place. Like we're still carrying that going into camp, the things that are happening at home. And so for me this past summer, I was really faced with this and how difficult it can be balancing what's going on at home and then also trying to be there for my team and for the campers and for families and volunteers and just hosts and all the things, especially being miles and miles away from all the things that are happening at home. So that would be one. The second, just the environment of camp. For some of our people that are heading with us this summer, like it will be a drastic change to be going from home to camp, from your college to camp, from school, from college ministries, from all the things that are happening at home. Camp is going to be quite different than that. And so that can play a role. And the third, just the weightiness of a child's story. It is a gift that we get to know these campers on such a deep level. But there is a weight in that. And there's something really holy about carrying those burdens, like the Lord tells us to carry each other's burdens. But it definitely takes a toll. Like we're not just staffer robots. We are human beings as well. And so that can also take a toll. And so in light of those 3 challenges, the things outside of camp, the environment of camp, the weightiness of camp, I would say the biggest thing is silence and solitude is the absolute, I think, best way to take the ownership of that, taking the time to sit with the Lord and to sit and to reflect and ask those questions we talked about earlier. Just taking the time. I know it feels like time isn't something that you have, and time away from campers is not time that you feel like you have, but when you do have it, like taking advantage of it and taking that time to really think about all the things that you're experiencing, because this is a huge difference than your day-to-day life. But it's an extremely incredible, like sweet experience, but these things also take a toll on your emotional health. And I think it's important to find that balance of pouring out, but also taking the time in silence and solitude, just like Jesus. I mean, we're trying to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
So taking that time to find a quiet place and to really think about those things and let the Lord renew you in that time, I think is super important.
Yeah, that was great. And you, I'm glad you hit on silence and solitude. It's one of my favorite spiritual practices. But let's define it a little bit here. What exactly does that look like? What does silence and solitude look like? And what is the effect that it has on our emotional health? How does it help us get healthy? And I think I mentioned this to you guys in a few weeks ago when we were talking. I think oftentimes for me, when I think about like analyzing myself or checking out myself as far as like my healthiness, I have to imagine like physical health, because it's kind of the easiest one to, you look in a mirror and the mirror is telling you back like, oh, I'm out of shape, or, I need to go take a shower, or whatever it is. Like you're able to tell like what's the health level out there. So I'm constantly looking for ways to like, how do we hold up a mirror with these other areas of our healthiness, from relational or emotional or whatever it is, and ask ourselves like, how do we need to get better? And then what are the exercises that get us there? And so I think I'm kind of rambling here, but I guess what is the mirror that we can hold up to see? And then how do we, if silence and solitude is like one of the things we can do to exercise emotional health in our lives, what does that look like, and what is the why? Like, why does that help?
Yeah. That's an especially important question in the context of camp, because I think that when we hear silence and solitude, we can easily get the image of sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop for an entire day, which for me that sounds fantastic. Don't know how realistic that is in the context of camp. And so while I think it is in the broader scope of life important to have long stretches of silence and solitude, putting the bar at a camp realistic level, that can be just internal silence and solitude, not about your external environment. I just think about last night. Our farmhouse we live in, huge farm, very small farmhouse. So 6 small rooms. You can communicate from anywhere to anywhere in the house. And so both silence and solitude are a little bit hard to come by, especially when it's 18 degrees outside and windy. So I was sitting in my bed with my eyes closed, having some time of reflection and prayer. And I would say about every 2.5 minutes, I was receiving a question or a request. And instead of seeing that as an intrusion, breaking, like, okay, now that doesn't count. My silence and solitude has been disqualified and I have to start over. I can just pause and address the need and return to that, because really what I'm trying to do is settle myself. And so, part of your question was what is that doing? Why is that an important element of it? And I think when we talked before, I used the illustration of if you take a mason jar out to the pond at our farm and scoop up water, it looks like dark brown gook and you can't see anything. But if you put a lid on that mason jar and put it on the windowsill for a few days and come back, it looks like crystal clear spring water. And then at the bottom of the jar is some dirt and some grime and some snail shells and probably some bullet casings, if we're honest. But you can see it. Because it's had space to settle. And once it's settled, then you can see what is in there and you can choose what to do with each of those elements. And so that internal silence and solitude is giving your soul space to settle so that you can see what externally is influencing you, what other person's story are you holding that's weighing you down. Sometimes that gets lost in the swirliness of constant demands, and that silence and solitude can give the space for you actually to see the things that are influencing you so you can choose what you want to do with those things.
Yeah. Man, beautifully said. Yeah. What are other practices that we can do that will help in those states of I don't know how to put it, I guess like disarray, or like that when we're feeling oh, I'm not in shape. I'm not where I need to be right here. What are the exercise? What's the exercise plan for this?
Yeah, I think something else that I was thinking about while you're talking about this, I loved what you said about the jar. I love that example that you shared. I think it's awesome.
Such a good illustration.
It's so good. It just reminds you, like, taking that moment to take like a deep breath and just like settle yourself and like just be before the Lord and just be yourself for 1 second. Because I think sometimes you forget in the swirliness. I like that. In the swirliness of all the things, it's easy to forget that you're just a child of the Lord doing the Lord's work, and you can just take a minute, take a deep breath, settle. So I loved that. But I think something else that you could really do is to hold up that mirror and to think about is ask the people around you how they're experiencing you. And like to look your director or a close friend on your team and just someone that has seen you enough, that has spent lots of time with you. I mean, this isn't just for the summer, but this could be any time of your life, to just look at a close friend, a parent, anyone that's close enough to you that has like earned that right to be heard by you, to ask them like, how are you experiencing me? What is it like to be on the other side of me? Like, especially when you're going through something like maybe some heavier, like emotional things, especially like the challenges I talked about, like they know you're walking through that. You've chosen to share that with them, maybe asking them, how am I acting in the light of this? And how are my actions impacting you? How are they impacting my team? How are they just impacting other people around me? And I think it also comes with the humility to hear what they have to say and not take it to heart, especially when emotions can be high. But I think sometimes we're too caught up in our own emotions or in our own squirreliness that we don't really know exactly how we're doing. Like, we have to hold up the mirror, and sometimes we don't need to be the ones holding the mirror, someone else. We need to invite someone else to help us hold up that mirror and look at ourselves in a way where we can truly like grow and move forward from it.
Yeah. Vulnerability is hard. But it's, I agree. I think it's like very important in this of self-assessment. And sometimes self-assessment involves others' assessment.
Yes.
But opening up and inviting, there's humility to that. And oftentimes when I think of Christ, that's one of the characteristics I think that sticks out the most to me is his humility. I think there's something of tying that into like us becoming more Christ-like is humbling ourselves even to the point of asking the hard questions and making ourselves vulnerable to others of, hey, give me the hard feedback. Speak to me and let me know this. And as a leader, I think it's important for us to do that as we're getting ready for whatever it is we're embarking on, whether it's a summer leadership position that's just for a few months and you're getting ready to do something really hard with a small team for a couple months, or in something outside of camp or another opportunity you're going to step in to lead people. I think it's very important to do that pre-work and to kind of assess yourself and get yourself ready as you're coming in and with this responsibility of walking through whatever the journey is with people. So, yeah, you're spot on, Samrys. And you kind of asked the question I was prepping of like, oh yeah, what do we do to get to, like, what's the advice we give our staff to get them ready for that? Yeah. Is there any, as we're thinking specifically about our staff that are about to go in and lead and they're prepping for the summer, we talked about being vulnerable and opening up, and then practice of silence and solitude, which is a practice that goes on for a long standing. Any other advice or things that we can give our staff as they are trying to get themselves in the right place coming into the summer?
I love the asking for feedback, because we all have blind spots and we don't know that we have them because they're blind spots.
Yeah.
And so we won't locate them without the help of other people. I think alongside of that, I think we all have different dashboards that can tell us how we're doing emotionally, and they're unique to each person. I've got my Garmin running watch on, and it's going to tell me my heart rate and how many calories I've burned, how many steps I've taken,
all the stuff.
Stress, heart rate variability. I can look and quickly see all the numbers. It knows the numbers I need to look at, and I know what to do with those. Emotionally, I've got to build my own dashboard. So for me, one is if there's something that happens on a regular basis that mildly irritates me, and that thing happens and I get furious instead of mildly irritated, that's a flashing light on my emotional dashboard that something else, you talked about other things outside, something else is going on inside of me that's making that mild irritation a big thing. And reflexively, I'm going to think, ooh, they did something worse than usual. But really, it's about me. It's not about them. And so if something affects me way more than it usually does, that's an indicator that I need to find some silence and solitude, whether it's on a mountaintop or just internally, to determine what else am I holding that's making things harder to deal with than they usually are, because that's about me and that's something that I need to attend to. And so before entering into the squirreliness and swirliness of summer, starting to be a student of ourselves and asking, okay, what are the indicators, what are the flashing lights for me that when these things happen or these things don't happen, it's an indicator that there's something that I'm not aware of that I need to figure out so that I can have better ownership of how I'm showing up with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, building out your dashboard and having that ready. I immediately go you're thinking of a Garmin watch. I immediately go to a car. So I just think of my own car. It's telling me you need to go get an oil change. It's like, oh yeah, there's that reminder. That's great. Okay, well, guys, this conversation's been awesome. I love this topic of emotional health, and I love putting an emphasis on it and reminding our staff that it is okay. I think to the point we hit on earlier where everyone has emotions and everyone is an emotional being because we're created in the image of God, and giving us kind of the okay green light to like explore those emotions and create the systems, the dashboards, the people and accountability, whatever it is that's going to help us discover that what is best for us and how we can get ourselves in that place. So thank y'all for diving into this. Before we wrap, I want to give y'all both a chance to just speak one more time with our staff or share anything that someone might listening, like a piece of information that might be helpful in the realm of emotional health.
I would just say our emotions are not meant to be held alone. We're created for community. And so whether you're at camp or at school or at home, if you're feeling a big emotion and don't know what to do with it, go to someone you trust and let them help bear that burden.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was great. I also just loved what you said a minute ago about being a student of yourself. I love that. That is such a good thing, a good advice, I think, for our staff and just for young adults and anybody listening. Just be a student of yourself. I think kind of what we've been talking about, how like Jesus was the best leader. And so to be a student of his, to really dive into what it looks like and how Jesus served as a leader, I think will set you up to have that example, to know like he did seek silence, he did seek solitude, and he was extremely vulnerable with his people, and he didn't do it alone. He had his friends. So I think that is to be a student of yourself and be a student of the best leader we know, which is Jesus. So.
Yeah. Hold up that beer and become more and more like Christ.
Yep.
Jeremy, Samarys, thank y'all so much for joining the podcast and leaning in with us on this really important topic. And thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Leaders in the Making. I do have a quick challenge for you. So we are still looking for staff to help us out this summer. So if you have friends, siblings, classmates, anyone you know that wants to spend this summer impacting the lives of campers, maybe that's you. Maybe you're a listener who is not working this summer and you think, man, I really want to do that. Send them over to work@winshape.org and encourage them to apply today. We are constantly looking for top-notch staff to fill in spots that we have open. So we were trying to make this summer unforgettable for you, for your friends, and for all the campers that we're going to get to reach this summer. So send everyone on over to work@winshape.org. Thank you so much for being a part of the WinShape mission. And until next time, I'm your host, Titus Arnold. Thanks for listening.